This Viltrox lens will give your Sony APS-C camera full frame results. No kidding. Let's get into it. Welcome to the channel, folks. My name's Shane. In today's video, we're checking out a very impressive APS-C autofocus lens for the Sony E-mount. This is the Viltrox Pro 27mm f1.2 prime lens. This Viltrox lens was already available for the Fuji X mount, so it's great to see a Sony E-mount version of this lens also now available. This is a dedicated APS-C lens, which means the 27mm focal length on APS-C works out to 40.5mm in terms of that full frame equivalent. Whether you own a Sony FX30 and do video work or a Sony a6600 series camera for photography, this will give you full frame results on a crop sensor camera. This video will cover the photographic and video performance of this lens, and I'll timestamp each section down in the description box below. Before we get into it, a big thank you to Viltrox for sending this out. If you'd like to check it out, I'll link it down in the description box below. Let's cover video performance. So if you're on a Sony FX30, you'll appreciate this fast f1.2 aperture. This fast aperture allows for super shallow depth of field look, rivaling that of full frame gear. Let's take a 40-second look at some sample footage shot with the Viltrox 27mm f1.2 prime lens on my Sony FX30, and then we'll come back and cover everything you need to know about this killer prime lens. Let's talk about this 40mm equivalent field of view. So 27mm on APS-C is really handy whether you're doing street or product photography, seated shots like this, talking to the camera, or just about anything else. While this is wider than your standard nifty 50 lens, it's still very versatile for both video and photographic purposes. If you're a solo content creator or shooter, you're able to stand in frame and be a little bit closer to the camera than you would be with a 50mm equivalent field of view. So this will work great in a YouTube studio, whether you're out shooting in the field. This focal length is also flattering to the face, unlike wide or super wide field of view lenses. So if you're looking for something great for a YouTube studio, this will be a no-brainer. This f1.2 aperture will create the same shallow depth of field look as an f1.8 lens on a full frame camera. So this will no doubt be the lens a lot of video shooters will want. Photographers will also appreciate the versatility of this lens in a wide range of scenarios and situations, and we'll take a look at some sample footage as we go. Viltrox has been on an absolute tear when it comes to releasing lenses. I've been lucky enough to review quite a number of their E-mount lenses, and this is the most impressive one so far, in line with their 16mm f1.8 full frame lens. At the time of filming, this Viltrox Pro series lens will set you back $545 US. In contrast, the Sony 24mm f1.4 G Master lens is just under $1,400 on B&H. This lens will make a lot of sense for photographers or filmmakers on a budget who want premium subject separation, low light performance, and something other than your typical 35 or 50mm field of view. All right, let's talk about build quality and features. This prime lens has all the bells and whistles associated with a much more expensive prime lens like the Sony G or G Master series lenses. For starters, the Viltrox lens features a dedicated aperture ring that can either be set to clicked or declicked thanks to the switch on the side. Speaking of aperture, the aperture range goes from f1.2 all the way down to f16 with an automatic option at the end. Now this automatic option allows you to set the aperture from the dials on your camera if you prefer to work that way. The clicks on the aperture ring feel solid, and I doubt you'll have any issue accidentally knocking it to a different setting by mistake. It really clicks in nicely. Setting the click mode to off, the aperture ring glides beautifully. This declicked option is a great way for video shooters to adjust exposure smoothly and silently. On the opposite side of the lens here, you'll find an autofocus manual focus switch and a programmable button. This lens is great. Not only is it dust and splash proof, but we now get an all metal lens body. The focus ring feels smooth and responsive, and I actually prefer it over the feel of the focus ring on the G Master because it's wider and you can get a better grip. We get a 67mm front filter thread, so if you want to load an ND on here you can, and we get a USB terminal on the back for easy firmware upgrades. While the Viltrox 27mm f1.2 lens is quite large, it feels great on my Sony FX30. Whether you're shooting videos or photos, it's a great match. The minimum focusing distance on this lens is 0.28 meters or 28 centimeters, allowing you to get really great close-up shots like these examples on screen. This is one of my favorite lenses for close-up photography, as you can totally obliterate the background if need be, while having your subject quite sharp in focus. Let's talk about the handling and weight. So as you can no doubt see, this lens packs in quite a bit of size, coming in at 560 grams, and it's definitely not one of the smallest Viltrox lenses I've reviewed by any means. The handling overall is great, and it's very well balanced on my Sony FX30. If you're like me though and you have larger hands, just know there's not a lot of room between the grip and the lens, so I find my middle finger grazing the notches on the aperture ring. I only notice this though when handling the camera and lens with one hand. As soon as I'm shooting with a support like this, it's a non-issue, but definitely worth mentioning. While this lens might be larger than what some folks enjoy shooting with on APS-C, the build quality and optical performance makes up for any size trade-offs. This is a premium lens at an affordable price, and the build quality again is up there with my Sony G Master. Let's talk about focus breathing. This is where the lens appears to zoom in and out when pulling focus from minimum to infinity focus and back. There's some definite focus breathing on this lens, and if you're racking focus a lot, you will notice it. Unlike most of the new Sony lenses, this doesn't have any of that focus breathing compensation support within the camera. So if you're shooting video a lot and this type of focus breathing is a deal breaker for you, then you might want to look at getting something else. That said though, for most gimbal work or handheld video work, I didn't find it to be a problem. It was only extremely noticeable when I held something right up in front of the lens. So yeah, unless you're doing those drastic focus pulls, it shouldn't be an issue. In regards to manual focus, this is a focus by wire lens, which means the focus ring has no hard stops on either side. I had no issues pulling focus whatsoever, and it was easily one of the nicest lenses I've used from any lens manufacturer when it comes to the feel of this focus ring. Let's talk about the fast f1.2 aperture, because this lens will give you full frame results on an APS-C camera body. Thanks to this fast f1.2 aperture, it's easy to create a nice smooth bokeh effect, and the background blur to my eye looks great. Let's cover continuous autofocus for video, because this is a bit of a mixed bag. What I noticed with this lens is if you need to track a faster moving subject, this is where it can struggle. For talking headshots like this, or if you need to tap to focus to switch between points, it will work fine. Now, I experimented with different speed and sensitivity modes, and it's either a slower, more sluggish, accurate autofocus, or a faster focus pull that jitters or second guesses itself. You'll notice this lens will also pulse or bounce to confirm focus if you have the settings on the camera set too fast. Here's another example of the pulsing effect with the speed and sensitivity set too high for face tracking. If you slow the speed down, it pulls focus a lot better, but it won't keep up for more demanding situations, so it's a bit of a balancing act. I'm hopeful that the autofocus performance can be fixed in a future firmware update, and it's nowhere close to the performance of the Viltrox 35 or 50mm primes as of shooting this video. Editor Shane here, just to let you know, there's a brand new firmware for this particular lens and I've got it installed. Right as I was exporting this project, an email came through from Viltrox saying, hey, we've got a new firmware update that should address a lot of the autofocus issues. So this is with the Sony FX30 with the speed and sensitivity both set to 5. I would usually avoid this in the old firmware because it would be hunting and doing some crazy stuff as it goes from the camera back to my eye, but in my test and what I can see looking at my reference monitor right here, it looks vastly improved. Now I need to test this further, but at least the firmware update's here, and I'm sure it's going to be much better than the prior version, just based on a few of my simple tests, so well done Viltrox. Photographic autofocus is really reliable, and I shot a bunch of test samples with this lens, everything from landscapes to animals, and the autofocus was not a problem whatsoever. It was reliable and predictable. My only APS-C camera is the Sony FX30, so I was unable to do a lot of the high burst rate photography tests, but for general shooting, it worked well. Let's talk about sunstars, flaring, and chromatic aberration. So stopping this lens down between f8 and f16 gave me some really pleasing sunstars. Like most lenses, there's definitely some flaring, but nothing that ruined any of my sample shots. I think if you're happy with these samples on screen, then you get a kick out of this lens. Like most super fast lenses, there's also some chromatic aberration wide open at f1.2. For those unfamiliar with chromatic aberration, it's the purple and blue fringing that can appear in high contrast situations, and I did notice it. The great news is though, it drops off fast as you stop down, even to f2 in my test results. This lens has visibly less color fringing than other lenses I've paid twice the price of what this is worth for, so overall it's a really great performer. Alright, let's wrap this video up. So overall, this Viltrox 27mm f1.2 prime lens will make your FX30 look very much like its full frame counterpart when shooting video. Video shooters or photographers wanting the ultimate in background blur and key features on a lens will make this a no-brainer for just about any style of shooting. This lens is great and it feels so good on my Sony FX30, and if you like the G Master lenses and their overall form factor and handling, I think you'll like this one. If you want to see more of my Viltrox reviews, I'll link down to a full playlist down in the description so you can check out more of my videos. Thanks again for watching. My name's Shane. I will catch you on the next one. See ya.